Well, before we go to session two, I'm going to introduce our next very special speaker. Congressman Paul Tonko represents the 20th District in New York. He has since 2009, I believe. He is a member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce and a mechanical and industrial engineer. If any of you go to Wires Universities or to the Clean Energy Expo on the Hill in the summertime, you'll probably see him speaking and doing a wonderful job. I think that he is eminently qualified to be an advisor to his colleagues in Congress on energy issues. He was president CEO of NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, and has a deep background in this area. What I love about the congressman is that he tends to think systematically about all the things we can do, including, and I would advise you take a look at it sometime, his framework for climate action in the U.S. Congress, which I think is full of some real wisdom. So let me introduce Paul Tonko, who has to make some remarks and go to Congressman Cummings' funeral. But if you have questions, and I don't know if he'll have time, please use the microphones on the side so that we can capture your thoughts as well. Thank you. Congressman.
Thank you very much, Jim, and thank you for the opportunity to join with so many here. It's always a pleasure to be at the Canadian Embassy. Thank you to the Embassy for hosting us this morning. As you heard, I'm from the 20th District of New York, which puts me in the Capital Region in upstate New York, and my engineering studies were along the Canadian border. So I always feel like I was that much closer to the good feel of Canada. But my upstate New York district has a deep connection, very deep connection with our Canadian neighbors. And having attended college at Clarkson University, had a number of folks on the hockey team then, which was primarily Canadian. So, and we had a pretty good team because of that. Our pasts and our futures are intertwined. So strengthening that United States-Canadian relationship has always been a high priority for me and my district. The more we can foster cross-border cooperation, the stronger both nations will be. And I think that that is especially true in terms of strengthening the literal and metaphorical interconnections of our energy systems and our grids. I also want to thank Jim. Jim and Wires, thank you for the invitation to join in what I believe is an essential summit. It's an impressive collection of participants, headlined, of course, by Secretary Moniz, an impossible act to follow. We got to chat a bit in the back as he was leaving. But he has been a great Secretary of Energy, and we really miss his involvement with that federal component of issues in a direct way. The work being done by him and the team at Energy Futures Initiative on deep decarbonization is incredibly important to what we are working toward in Congress. We want to make certain that our policy preferences are backed by science and data. And we are lucky to have an expert like Ernie Moniz and thoughtful people like those gathered here guiding us. There's no way I can be as insightful as the Secretary, but I will at least try to provide a little perspective on what has been happening in Congress. When this Congress began, we were focused on how we can modernize and improve our nation's infrastructure. And I still believe we need to seize the infrastructure debate as an opportunity to ensure that we are supporting a grid that is ready for those demands of the 21st century. One that is more advanced, more flexible, and certainly more resilient to natural and cyber threats, and cleaner by being capable of integrating high levels of intermittent, renewable resources. And we all know that transmission is indeed that backbone of this system. Expanded transmission is needed for a modern, a dynamic, and flexible grid that integrates more renewable energy resources especially as we look to unlock the potential of resource-rich but remote geographics. While the infrastructure debate has gone through a few fits and starts, our committee is continuing to work on some big climate and clean energy priorities. Earlier this year, the Energy and Commerce Committee launched our 100% Clean Initiative, which seeks to develop legislation that puts our country on a path toward achieving economy-wide net zero emissions by 2050. We have been meeting with many stakeholders, including some of the groups organizing today's summit, holding hearings and beginning to write discussion draft legislation. So far, we have held hearings with representatives from energy-intensive manufacturers, from buildings and heavy-duty transportation, which was just earlier this week. And next week, the Energy Subcommittee will examine the power sector. These hearings have been constructive, they've been solution-focused, and fairly bipartisan. And I think it is because we are seeking to foster an honest conversation, which starts by acknowledging the challenges that need to be overcome in order to achieve our clean energy and emissions reduction targets. Getting to net zero will be a big challenge. It's a robust goal. But rather than overlooking foreseeable concerns and criticisms, we're seeking to understand them and mitigate any potential harms. That is why the committee is working to provide fairness and opportunities for workers and implement a transition plan for communities and individuals that face disruptions. Ensure the transition works for all Americans, including those facing historic inequities and environmental injustices. Maintain energy affordability to avoid harming America's most vulnerable people. Preserve and improve the United States' competitiveness, and incentivize and innovate climate solutions for energy services and industrial processes that currently do not have a viable pathway to decarbonization. And trying to deal with our infrastructure constraints is yet another big challenge. We know public policy will continue to play a major role in driving clean energy deployment. This is definitely true on the state level, and there are those of us in Congress that would like to advance national policies as well. But I do believe it is irresponsible for policymakers to set targets, as necessary as they may be, and then not allow for the infrastructure to enable those targets to be achieved. And that includes people on my side of the aisle, people saying that we need to act as urgently and ambitiously as possible to deploy clean energy resources. We need to acknowledge that we cannot decarbonize 80+% of our electricity mix in 10 years, when it takes over 10 years to build a new transmission project. These infrastructure constraints are indeed real, and I do not see how we can overcome them without Congress providing more direction on national transmission policy. I know these projects can be politically unpopular. I have seen it in my own state, including on a project to deliver some much-needed Canadian hydropower to downstate New York. But members of Congress, especially those that care about addressing climate change and promoting clean energy, are elected to lead. We need to be working to advance some necessary policies, even when they may be difficult or, for most rights, unpopular. And I'm not suggesting that we need to build a gold-plated system to force ratepayers to pay for unneeded projects or start seizing land or harming vistas with no central plan. I am very conscious of the need to keep consumers and affordability at the center of our energy transition, but we need to have a more honest conversation about what our infrastructure needs are and will be if we manage to enact significant clean energy legislation. There are a few things we can do. In the more near term, I think FERC needs to take another look at the interregional planning process. To the extent that we can standardize planning processes across regional boundaries and harmonize differing methods and criteria for project approval, we should be able to make the process less burdensome. Cost allocation is another huge challenge, and I think it is something that FERC needs to think about. The recent transmission incentives docket is a good first step, but I do not think it would hurt for Congress to tell FERC that it is time to take a deeper look at interregional planning. Even in the longer term, federal involvement in siting and permitting will always be politically difficult. But again, it is worth thinking about in what narrow applications additional authorities may be needed. I think the only way that type of policy could be accepted is if it is coupled with a number of other policies that seek to avoid new transmission constructions, all of which are meritorious on their own, in my view. These include expanding capacity on existing infrastructure through deployment of advanced technologies and requiring greater consideration and utilization of non-transmission alternatives, including storage, demand response, efficiency, and certainly other distributed generation. I also think that we need to provide incentives to redevelop sites with retired fossil fuel generating units. When big coal plants retire, they tend to be sitting on underutilized existing infrastructure. It is worth exploring incentives for putting renewables or storage on those sites. I acknowledge all of these suggestions, but especially siting and permitting. Those can be both politically and certainly technically difficult. But I do hope that we can continue this dialogue to build consensus, debate solutions, and make certain that we are fully considering all the challenges that may arise from our well-intended clean energy goals. And hopefully in 2021, we will have in our country a president that understands the tremendous opportunities through job creation, pollution reduction, and electricity reliability that will come from responding to climate change, a science that I embrace, one that I do not suggest is a Chinese hoax, by building the infrastructure to unlock clean energy's full potential. If that happens, I do hope we can fight to prioritize the infrastructure investments that are indeed necessary to make that vision possible. I thank you again for the opportunity to join you this morning, to understand and share with you that we need to go forward in a science-based, evidence-based way. Science takes us to truth, takes us to power, a commodity we all embrace. I would be happy to hear some comments or questions. I sincerely do hope we can continue to work on these issues together. And again, thank you for your kind attention and certainly the invitation to come to the embassy yet one more time. Thank you, Wires and Network and all. Thank you. We can stay about 5 minutes. I've got to get, yeah, about 5 minutes we have.
5 minutes worth of questions? Anybody?
Someone?
I'm Terry Boston with Grid Protection Alliance, and I know NYSERDA has on the streets an RFP to talk about getting to the 100% renewable goal that legislation has passed. My question, I guess, is have you thought about how we get that DC line built from Canada into New York City, and what other transmission things do you have in mind that we have not been able to get through the siting process?
Well, I know that the DC line has become a very strong force of advocacy. I think that we really need to bring public discussion forward so that the benefits of such a line can be shared, that the communities understand, the consumers understand full well. I think it has been left to a lot of the technical minds and the policymakers, but this is something that will serve the public, and we have got to open up that discussion, the public dialogue. What I think is lacking in all of this, the fact that we can denounce climate change, the fact that we can get away with delay and denial, is that there isn't that sound public discussion. Having worked at the Public Service Commission before my elected days, having worked at the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, leading that agency, I know the merit that comes with sharing with the public. And we need to do that. And we need to we need to put it into a good planning concept too. Otherwise, without the planning, the engineer in me says we don't know where we're going. We're not providing for a common goal that everyone can tug together and achieve. Is there another hand up here somewhere?
Congressman, thank you. Rolf Nordstrom with the Great Plains Institute. you sort of hinted at this in your remarks, but I'm just curious, and I think I may know the answer, but I want to ask it anyway. When you talk to colleagues in Congress about a larger federal role, however nuanced that might be, in developing the nation's transmission grid, I mean, what are the principal concerns? The analogy in my mind is other big federal endeavors like building the interstate highway system and the national benefits and national security that afforded. Does that kind of argument ring true for your colleagues, or does it just run up against states' rights and people feeling parochial?
I was just going to say, it comes, I think we see these waves of government tone that come and go. I think with the infrastructure build, the road concepts of the 50s, with the Eisenhower administration, there was no denouncement that it was social policy, and that it was a socialization of thinking. Today, we've got that debate going, which I think is regrettable, because there are certain things that are best done from a national perspective. I ran because I thought there needed to be better energy planning from the national level. I was in what many call the dream job with NYSERDA, after having served 25 years in my state legislature, the last 15 as energy chair. So there was a lot of energy policy that I wanted to see expanded into a national, regional thinking. And it was my motivation, again, to run. But there are those who now emphatically, just very strongly speak to states' rights. But we're all interconnected here. And, to transmit power to the consumer, especially when a lot of that power is coming from the heartland, we have got to have national strategy. So I'm hopeful that we can move along, but without the leadership, without an administration that really truly believes in decarbonization and in the climate struggle, we don't have that benefit of the bully pulpit. And I'm hoping that in a few months we will. And if not, we are going to have to take those next 4 years to fully develop our climate policy, our pricing policy on carbon.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Congressman.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Good luck to all of us.